The number was $47,200. I found it on a Tuesday afternoon, sitting at my desk in the spare room I use as a home office. I wasn't looking for it. I was trying to print an insurance form. I clicked the wrong folder, and there it was, a spreadsheet I didn't recognize, saved under a name that meant nothing to me. A business name. And inside it, a running total of expenses, meticulously logged, going back 22 months. Equipment, vendors, a commercial kitchen rental on the east side of town, ingredient orders, packaging, website development, all of it adding up, line by line, to $47,200. My hand stopped moving the mouse. I didn't close the file. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there in the quiet of that room, staring at a number that represented money I had earned, logged by someone else, for a business I had never heard of. 30 seconds passed before I realized I was holding my breath. 2 years ago, I never would have looked. That's the part that still gets me when I sit with it honestly. Not the betrayal itself, but the version of me that existed before I found that file. The man who trusted so completely that he stopped paying attention. I built my entire career on reading structures, on finding the hidden fault before it became the catastrophe. And somehow, inside my own home, I had missed every sign. My name is Warren. I'm 58 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer, most of them working on infrastructure, bridges, overpasses, load-bearing systems that had to hold weight no matter what the conditions were. I retired 2 years early because my knees had started their complaint and because I had enough to live carefully and well. I own a house on a quiet street with an oak tree in the front yard that I planted myself 14 years ago. I have 2 daughters, both grown, both living out of state. And for 6 years before all of this, I was a widower. My first wife, Carol, died of a heart condition at 53. We had a good marriage, the kind built on routine and respect, and a shared understanding of each other's silences. After she was gone, the house became a different kind of structure, technically sound, but hollow at the center. I did not expect to rebuild that. I had made a kind of peace with the emptiness. Then I met Renata. She was introduced to me at a neighborhood fundraiser by a mutual friend who thought we might have things in common. She was 51, warm in the way that draws a room toward her, the kind of person who remembers exactly what you ordered at a restaurant and somehow makes you feel seen by that small fact. She laughed easily and listened carefully, which is a rarer combination than people realize. We dated for 1.5 years before I asked her to marry me. By then, her son Damon had already become part of the picture. Damon was 27 when I first met him. He was tall, quick-witted, the kind of young man who fills a room with energy and projects enough confidence that you tend to overlook the substance underneath, or the lack of it. He was between things when I met him, Renata explained with a kind of fond exasperation. Between jobs, between plans, between the idea he had for himself and the life he was actually living. She said it the way a mother says such things, with love covering the worry underneath. He'll find his footing, she told me. He just needs a little time and the right environment. I had no reason to doubt her. I had raised 2 daughters who had taken different roads to get where they were going, and I understood that young people do not all move on the same timetable. I welcomed Damon into the house without conditions. He had a room upstairs, access to the kitchen, a key. I told him he was welcome as long as he needed. I believed every word of that when I said it. The first compromise came 3 months after the wedding. Renata suggested we consolidate our finances into a shared account for household expenses. It made sense on the surface. We were married, we shared a home, we shared a life. She was organized and detail-oriented about money in a way I appreciated. I handled the big-picture engineering of things, and she managed the day-to-day flow. It felt like a natural division. I set up the direct deposit. Looking back, I can see the moment clearly now, the way you can see a structural flaw in a blueprint once someone draws a circle around it. At the time, it just looked like a reasonable arrangement between 2 people who trusted each other. The second compromise came quietly, the way the most consequential ones always do. Renata began managing all the household bills directly. She had the time, and I had the retired engineer's tendency to overthink minor domestic logistics, so her taking the reins felt like relief. When I noticed my balance seemed lower than expected some months, she would explain it patiently. Utilities ran high in winter. The property taxes came out. She had renewed the home warranty. Each explanation was plausible enough that my internal alarm, the one that had kept bridges from falling for 31 years, stayed quiet. Damon's expenses began appearing the way water finds a crack. First, it was his phone bill, which Renata said she had added to our plan to save him money. Then a car payment when his old one failed its inspection. Then groceries he bought with the household card. Then a fuel charge. Then what she described as a one-time loan of $600 to cover a gap in his rent. She always mentioned these things after the fact, briefly, in a tone that suggested they were too small to require a conversation. I didn't argue. I didn't want to be the kind of man who counted out his generosity in small increments. My father had taught me that real generosity doesn't keep score, and I had carried that value for 58 years without questioning it. But something quiet in me had started keeping score anyway. I noticed it first as a kind of vague unease that arrived on paydays. I would check the account and feel a flicker of something. Not alarm, just a faint pressure, like the early reading on a gauge before anyone takes it seriously. I would ask Renata about a withdrawal, and she would answer warmly and completely, and the warmth of her answer would settle the gauge back down. I was a man trained to trust measurements. She gave me her measurements, and I accepted them. The thing about being deceived by someone you love is that it doesn't feel like deception while it is happening. It feels like trust. It feels like the natural functioning of a life you chose. My card declined at a hardware store on a Saturday morning in October. I was buying materials to replace a section of lattice on the back fence. Nothing expensive. The clerk ran it twice. I apologized, called it a glitch, paid with cash from my wallet, and drove home feeling a low, cold current moving through me that I did not name yet. That evening, Renata was warm and distracted and said she would look into it first thing Monday. Technical issue with the bank, probably. She touched my arm when she said it. I did not sleep well that night. On Monday, instead of waiting for her to look into it, I went to the bank myself. I asked to speak with someone about my account history. A calm, precise woman named Sylvia sat across from me and pulled up 22 months of statements without any visible reaction, which told me she had seen this before. I read through them slowly. I am an engineer. I read data the way other people read a story, looking for the pattern before naming the conclusion. The pattern took 40 minutes to read. When I finished, I sat very still for a moment, the way you sit when you are recalculating a load and the number comes out wrong. Then I asked Sylvia to help me open a new account, sole ownership, effective immediately. She nodded once and said, "Of course." That was how I came to be sitting in my spare room 2 days later, clicking the wrong folder, finding the spreadsheet. The bank statements had shown me the total, $47,200 in charges I had never been consulted on. The spreadsheet showed me where it had gone. Damon had been building a food business, a small production company, artisan sauces, packaged goods, that kind of thing. He had a commercial kitchen rented on the east side of town. He had vendors and suppliers. He had a website and packaging and a logo. He had been operational in a quiet, preliminary way for nearly 2 years. He had built it entirely with my money, and he had never once mentioned it to me. I sat with that for a long time. Not the anger. The anger would come later, and it would be clean and manageable, the way strong feelings are when they arrive after full understanding. What I sat with first was something closer to awe. Not admiring awe. The awe you feel when a structure you designed fails in a way that reveals something true about your original assumptions. I had assumed that trust, given freely, would be received with care. I had been wrong. I closed the laptop and went to the kitchen and made coffee. I stood at the window, looking at the oak tree in the yard. Its roots go down 11 feet now. I know this because I measured when I planted it. I thought about what I was going to say and how I was going to say it. When Renata came home that evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table with two things in front of me: a printed copy of the bank statements and a printed copy of the spreadsheet I had found. She came in carrying groceries, moving with the ordinary ease of a person who does not yet know the floor is about to change beneath her. She saw my face first. She set the bags down slowly. Damon was upstairs. I had heard him moving around earlier. I had not called him down yet. I said her name. I said it the way I say most things, quietly, without decoration. She sat down across from me. I slid the spreadsheet toward her. I watched her look at it. I watched the color in her face go through several changes, the way a pressure reading moves when a system is approaching its limit. She looked up at me. Her mouth opened. No sound came. I slid the bank statements across next. Then I waited. If you are listening to this and something in it is sitting heavy in your chest, if you have ever smiled and helped and stayed quiet while something was being taken from you piece by piece, I want you to subscribe before we go any further. You are not the only one who has been here, and you deserve to hear the rest of this story. What happened next was not a screaming match. That surprised me afterward when I thought back on it. I had expected volume. What came instead was a different kind of intensity, the concentrated stillness of two people who are both very clear about what is happening. Renata said she could explain. I told her to go ahead. She said that Damon had the idea for the business 18 months ago and had been too embarrassed to present it to me formally because he was afraid I would dismiss it. She said she believed in him and wanted to give him a real chance. She said she had planned to tell me once the business had traction, once there was something real to show. I listened to all of it without interrupting. Then I asked her one question. Did you believe this was your decision to make alone? She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I believed you would say no. I let that settle. So instead of asking me, you spent my money on his behalf for 22 months. She didn't answer because the answer was yes, and we both knew it. I called Damon down from upstairs. He came into the kitchen already defensive, the way people become defensive when they have been listening at the top of the stairs. He stood against the counter with his arms crossed, reading the room. His eyes went to the papers on the table and then back to me. I told him I had found the spreadsheet. I told him I had read the statements. I told him the number. He didn't deny it. That was the thing that surprised me most. He looked at me steadily and said, I was building something real. I wasn't wasting it. I was going to pay you back when it turned profitable. I studied his face. I am a man who has evaluated structures for 3 decades. I know the difference between a load-bearing wall and a decorative one. Damon believed what he was saying. That made it more complicated, not less. You were going to pay me back, I said. Money you had taken without telling me, from a business you had built without telling me, using a decision your mother made without telling me. He had no answer for the structure of that. Renata reached across the table toward my hand. Daniel, she said. She used my father's name for a moment, caught herself, corrected it. Warren, we can fix this. We can talk about it. We can make a plan. I moved my hand back. I told them both clearly that my income had been redirected to a private account as of 2 days ago. I told them I would not be contributing to shared household expenses beyond a fixed monthly amount, covering only my share of utilities and mortgage cost, which I would transfer directly. I told them that Damon's expenses, all of them, were finished. Damon's jaw tightened. You're going to kill the business before it even starts. It was never mine to kill, I replied. It was never presented to me as mine. Renata's voice went thin. You're doing this because you're angry. You're making permanent decisions in the middle of an emotional moment. I looked at her carefully. I've been an engineer for 31 years. I don't make structural decisions based on emotion. I make them based on what the data shows me. She flinched at that. Damon pushed off the counter. So that's it. You're just shutting down. No, I said. I'm enforcing load limits. When a structure has been carrying more than it was designed to carry, you don't keep adding weight. You redistribute. He stared at me. He had grown up in a world where that kind of language was abstract. For me, it was the most precise thing I knew how to say. I told them they had 30 days. 30 days to make a decision about whether they could contribute to this household on fair and defined terms, or whether they needed to find another arrangement. I put the terms in writing that same week. Renata would pay a monthly amount toward household expenses. Damon would pay a smaller amount as rent for his room. Neither would have any access to my accounts. Any existing debt accumulated through the shared account was theirs to resolve. The 30 days were not peaceful. They were the quietest kind of terrible, polished surfaces over deep structural damage. Renata tried sympathy first, sitting with me in the evenings with a softened voice and a careful face, suggesting that what I really needed was to feel heard, that if we went to a counselor and talked it through, I might see things differently. I went to one session. The counselor, a pleasant woman with good instincts, asked Renata directly whether she had consulted Warren before redirecting his finances. Renata said she had intended to. The counselor looked at her for a moment without speaking. We did not go back. Damon tried a different approach. He came to me one afternoon in the garage while I was working and laid out a formal business proposal, printed, bound, with projected revenue figures and a repayment schedule. He placed it on my workbench and said he wanted to do things right this time. I read every page. The plan was not unreasonable. He had genuine ideas and real energy behind them. I handed it back to him. I told him it was a solid start and that he should take it to a small business lender or a proper investor, someone who could evaluate it on its merits. I was not the right person to fund it, not because I doubted his ability, but because we had already established, without his knowledge, that we could not operate that way. He stood there holding his proposal. I think that was the moment he understood it was truly over, not in anger, but in the clearest, most permanent way. On the 28th day, Renata told me she had found an apartment, 2 bedrooms, a reasonable commute to her job. She said it quietly, at breakfast, looking at her coffee cup. I nodded. She asked if I wanted her to leave before the 30 days were up. I told her she could take whatever time she needed to do it properly. She left on day 31 with Damon's help loading a rented truck. I did not watch from the window. I went to the garage and replaced a section of the back porch beam that had been showing dry rot for 2 years. I had been stepping around it, telling myself I would get to it. I had finally gotten to it. The first week alone in the house felt like recalibrating after a long displacement. I woke up earlier than I needed to. I made coffee and sat with it at the kitchen table in genuine silence and felt the silence as the correct condition of things rather than an absence. I went through each room slowly, not with ceremony, just with presence. I noticed things I hadn't noticed in 2 years. A hairline crack in the bathroom tile that needed addressing. A window in the guest room that stuck and let in cold air. Small structural failures I had been too occupied to attend to. I attended to them. On the 9th day, Renata called. I answered. She said the apartment was smaller than she expected and asked whether I might reconsider one specific arrangement. She named a figure monthly toward Damon's portion of the commercial kitchen. She framed it carefully, not as a request for herself, but as a thing she was asking on his behalf. I told her I could not do that. She said she had expected that answer. I told her I appreciated that she called anyway. The silence on the phone was not hostile. It was the silence of 2 people standing at the accurate distance from each other. 3 months passed. Damon contacted me once, by email, formally. He had secured a small business loan through a credit union. He thanked me for reading his proposal. He said he thought the conversation we had in the garage had made him approach the lender differently, with more precision, with better documentation. He said he was not asking for anything. He just wanted me to know. I replied once. I told him I was glad to hear it. I meant it. 6 months after the day they left, I heard a knock at the front door on a Saturday afternoon. I was in the garage. I came around the side of the house and Renata was standing on the porch. She looked different than the last time I had seen her, not diminished, but quieter. The performance layer was gone. She was wearing a plain coat and carrying a small envelope in both hands. I said hello. She said hello. I asked her to come in. We sat at the kitchen table. The same chairs, the same afternoon light coming through the window. She set the envelope down between us and placed her hands flat on the table beside it. She said she had been calculating. She named a number. Not the full $47,200, she said, but a beginning. What she had put in the envelope was a cashier's check for $8,000. She said she was working 2 jobs. She said she would send what she could, monthly, without expectation, without strings, without negotiation. She said she was not there to ask for anything. She said she was there because she had built her career in accounting, and she had spent 6 months refusing to look honestly at her own ledger. And when she finally did, she could not live with the balance. I looked at the envelope for a long moment. I have held a lot of things in my hands in 58 years. Blueprints, a box of Carol's things after she died, my daughter's hand at her wedding, tools worn smooth from 3 decades of use. I picked up the envelope. I held it. I did not open it immediately. I looked at Renata and I said, I know you didn't do this because you didn't care about me. I know you did it because you cared about him more than you cared about being honest with me. That is a painful thing to say out loud, and I don't say it to punish you. I say it because it's the most accurate description of what happened, and I've spent my whole life trying to be accurate. She nodded. Her eyes filled, but she did not cry. She said, You're right. That's exactly what it was. We sat there for another hour. We talked about the small business, which was beginning to move, about her apartment, which she had made comfortable, about the particular strangeness of rebuilding a life in your 50s when you thought the building was finished. I made coffee. She drank hers slowly. When she stood to leave, she looked at the envelope still in my hand and said, Whatever you decide to do with it is the right thing. I walked her to the door. After she was gone, I stood in the kitchen for a while. Then I went to my desk and found the contact information for a mentorship program for young entrepreneurs I had read about the previous year. I endorsed the check over to them with Damon's name attached, as a donation in his direction. Not a gift to him, not a statement to her, just a redirection of something that had been misdirected long enough. I wrote no note. I sealed the envelope and mailed it the next morning. That evening I sat on the back porch with coffee and looked at the repaired beam. It was solid now, properly treated, correctly seated. You would have to know where the rot had been to find the repair. The porch held the same weight it always had. It just held it honestly now. I thought about the man I had been 2 years ago, the one who trusted so completely that he stopped measuring, the one who confused generosity with the absence of accountability, the one who had spent 31 years ensuring that public structures could bear the loads placed on them, and who had never once applied that same discipline to his own home. An engineer knows this. Every structure has a load limit. Exceed it quietly for long enough, and the failure, when it comes, will look sudden to everyone except the data. I had finally read the data. If you are listening to this and you have ever carried more than your share, quietly, patiently, because you believed that was what love required, I want you to hear something clearly. Knowing your limits is not selfishness. Enforcing them is not cruelty. It is the most honest thing a structure can do. I don't know what the next chapter looks like. I don't know whether Damon's business will succeed or whether Renata and I will ever sit at that table again. But I know that this house is standing correctly now, that the weight is distributed honestly, that when I walk through these rooms, every surface I touch is mine in the full, earned, unencumbered meaning of that word. And for a man who built his life on the integrity of structures, that is enough. That is everything.